All right. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody out to, I'm Chairman Thomas, and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for North Ogden City, September 21st, 2022. We'll begin our meeting by an invocation or a thought from Commissioner Watson, followed which being led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Nan Carroll.
Father in heaven, we're grateful for the opportunity we have to meet tonight. As Planning Commission, we're grateful for North Ogden, for the city that it is, and for its residents. We ask that we may be led tonight with good decisions. We do these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have Commissioner Webb with us online.
I do.
All right, we'll make note that all are in attendance tonight. Item number 2, minutes consideration and the mic's on. Not that we need them on. Consideration and action to approve the July 20th,
They'll be on in a second.
2022 Planning Commission meeting minutes and August 17th, 2022 meeting minutes. Any corrections or adjustments that need to be made?
I make a motion that we approve the July 20th, 2022 and the August 17th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
All right, I'll go ahead and read our meeting statement. Before each agenda item begins, city staff will give a report. After the staff report, the item will be opened for other speakers. The applicant will speak first and be allowed up to 10 minutes following the applicant. Any other interested person will be allowed to speak up for 3 minutes. The applicant has final rebuttal time of up to 5 minutes. Any materials that are displayed or referenced, e.g. pictures or written materials, are part of the record and must be left with the commission. Speakers are required to have signed in at the door and will state their name and address before beginning their remarks. If you agree with the previous speaker, then state your agreement to avoid repetitious remarks. Speakers shall address the commission from the podium or microphone and shall address all comments to the Planning Commission. And please silence your phones. Do we have any ex parte communications or conflicts tonight on the agenda? Being that we're legislative, can you technically have a conflict on a legislative item since it's just a recommendation to us?
You can if it's if it was a rezone and you own property.
Oh, I guess that's true. Yeah. All right. Commissioners, we've been asked to adjust the agenda, item number 6 to be moved to the last. Kai just needed a chance to be able to get here and to present his item. It is a city item, so
Do you need a motion to move that?
yes, please.
Make a motion that we move legislative item number 6, ZTA 2022-06 to be considered after item 8.
I'll second that. We have a motion and a second to adjust the agenda. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll begin tonight with item 7, the Zone Text Amendment 2022-9. Discussion, consideration, and recommendation of legislative amendment to revise the retaining wall standards to add clarifying language in Title 11, grading and drainage standards. Presenter is Scott Hess, our planning director, and Eric Casperson, our city engineer.
First, really quick, can I get the first and second on the motion for the meeting minutes?
I was the first.
So we've been asked to bring this back to you on the grading and drainage standards. We originally held a public hearing on this item, posted public hearing to discuss changes to the code that allows flexibility for walls to come in that may have a perceived life safety impact and having an engineer do reports that the city kind of feel like covers that liability. And when it got to council, there's also been a request to property owners within the same section of code that we're reviewing and amending to look at the total height of our retaining walls. So staff has gone back and taken a look at this, and the information in this case, it's kind of interesting. It's not really conclusive. So what we found, at least in state code and looking at similar cities that have hillsides like ours, or cities that are high growth cities, who seem to either have communities that regulate retaining wall heights, and that includes the total height, distance for tiers, what represents a tier, and total number of tiered walls, or they're silent on it, and they might just require a geotechnical or an engineering report. So staff doesn't have a real strong recommendation for you, other than to say that our 8-foot maximum height is not out of bounds with what other communities are requiring. And we sent this out to the Utah American Planning Association listserv to all the planners in the state, and received a response back just early this week before the meeting that Draper City allows up to a 9-foot tall wall with 2 tiers to make it up to 18 feet total. And they had some separation requirements between the back of the sidewalk. So what they were running into is tall retaining walls right at the back of the sidewalk that created kind of a tunnel effect between them and parked cars, or them and the high-speed corridors, which we haven't had to deal with too much because most of our retaining walls are up in residential neighborhoods that are more like a backyard or side yard. Well, I guess, really, they're more residential. They're less retaining walls that are holding up areas on our high-speed corridor. So if, me personally, planning department, planning director would say that I think that our ordinance is fine. We allow up to 8-foot tall walls. You do have to bury your footing, so that's 30 inches in there for frost protection. So total wall height's a little taller, but exposed wall is 8 feet. And we allow up to 3 tiers, so you can be 24 feet tall. If you were to increase the separation between the 2 walls, they become their own wall system. It's no longer a tiered system, and in that case, you can do walls indefinitely at that 8-foot height, but it starts to eat up distance really quickly. You have to have a big property to get those really tall walls. So with that, I won't go through each of these individual codes that we pulled for you. We've redlined those pieces that we think were relevant for your review and consideration. And I'll ask our city engineer, Eric, if he has anything to add.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So if I'm understanding you correctly, your recommendation to us is that no changes needed to our language. Can I ask him, what was it that brought this forward? I remember we had a gentleman that was in favor of this and spoke at our last meeting. Can you describe the issue? What that person needed or wanted, and how our ordinance doesn't
Accommodate them. Yeah, we have a wall that's been poured in place that's taller than 8 feet, that will be taller than 8 feet, even when you when you bury the footing. At this point, it's probably somewhere in the 11-foot range. And they've made a request. Well, they've spoken to multiple council members. Council members made a recommendation to staff, and this came forward for us to review and consider what the retaining wall heights would be, in which case we went out and we took a look at it. So we have multiple walls that exceed the 8 feet. We have walls that we built prior to the ordinance going into place. A few years ago, we established 8 feet as the maximum, and some of our engineering standards for gravity rock walls. So you'll see inconsistencies around the city, to include some that are there's one up in Mason Cove that's 20 feet tall, and it's an engineered block system wall. It's not like a Lowe's or Home Depot style block wall. And we have 2 of those up there in Mason Cove, one about 14 to 17 feet, one about 20 feet tall. I don't know if that was the impetus for the ordinance change, or if it was, potentially falling rock walls. There's a number of things that it could have been, but it predates me. And 8 feet doesn't seem to be overly restricted in the world of what we're seeing in Utah and other communities. We had a lot of rain. I'm kind of curious to see what tomorrow brings with the burst of rain that we have today. But last week we had a lot of rain. We had one retaining wall fail altogether in a subdivision up on the hill. A new retaining wall. It's only 6 or 9 months old. And That one wasn't a failure based on height, it was a failure based on construction method. So whether it was 8 feet tall, which it was a compliant 8-foot tall wall, or 6 or 11, it likely would have failed at some point just due to construction method. I'm not a civil engineer, so I can't say that exactly what happened, but the construction method looked like that would have been, that was a wall that likely would have fallen regardless. And then we've got other rock, gravity rock walls and areas where we've had multiple complaints or calls. I've dealt with multiple this week, and so is our building department, of dirt washing out those rock retaining walls and undercutting them, creating concerns. And we have a bunch of them right now.
And don't they have, when they do these walls, doesn't the engineering construction methods have to be approved by the
Yes.
city?
Yep. So we rely on a set of engineered plans.
Okay,
If the engineer is willing to stamp the plans, we aren't, we don't rerun those through a civil engineering test. But yes, we get a set of stamped plans as long as the wall is constructed to meet those stamped plans. We review it per, did you meet the plans submitted? We don't qualify whether or not you drew, designed a quality wall or not. That's not our call. But in this case, it was a stamped engineered set of plans. I believe the engineer has been in contact with the property owner and admitted that there were failures there.
so the engineer has to eat it.
That engineer's gonna.
The city doesn't have
The
liability.
city doesn't have liability, and really, the city doesn't have liability in any of these cases, so everything from, you've now got like a mini alluvial fan of dirt out the bottom of your rock wall onto grass, which we have lots of areas of ruined grass right now from that rainstorm. All the way up to these retaining wall failures. There's, as far as I understand, state code or the code on this, one is it's a civil issue, it's a civil trespass. You got to keep your water on site, but there's this other consideration of water that has always historically marched down the hill can continue to do so. So if you can show that as part of the subdivision's draining, gradage and draining plan, that it was always designed to traverse kind of across, I think you're going to have a hard time saying that they had to keep their water in their lot, unless it's something like a downspout. If it's a water produced on site that wasn't there before, so impervious surface, hard surface water coming off of your driveway and sloughs out a retaining wall, then they have a civil issue to say that you created water trespass. But
So that's why this is a question on the trail going from Barker Parkway over into that, whatever the name of that subdivision is, or that down road. There's a house that has 1, 2, 3, 4 drains coming off his property. It goes off of it, and 2 of them goes over onto the trail system. That starts undercutting the trail.
it depends on what the water is. It depends on the source of the water. If it's the
It's
downspout,
a downspout, it goes out of pipe onto it. I know I've reported the city, but I don't know if they've looked at it, did anything about it, just let it go, I don't know.
Right.
So the city's, well, if the landowner doesn't care, well, don't worry about it, as well, the city's the landowner.
Can I get qualification on our existing ordinance? So our 8-foot requirement is that, inclusive of all terraces, meaning, so you can have an 8-foot and then another terrace of 8 foot, so you can get to 16 feet.
you can get to 24. So
Based on
it's
3,
If
based
you
on
have a big
3
enough
8-foot
property.
3 8-foot terraces.
you'd have to go 8 feet up from the toe of this wall to the toe of the next one, 8 feet over, up, and then the same 8 foot up. So, yes.
Well, or whatever would you have to do that per section, or is it just from the bottom of the first to the top?
No, you have to have a distance from the toe of wall to toe of wall, no less than the tallest section of wall. So if you're an 8-foot section of wall, you have to have 8 feet of separation to the next one. Walls, unless they're a pour in place concrete wall, aren't ever perfectly straight up and down. So you kind of measure from the toe to the next toe. So at that top section, it may be reduced from 8 feet, but that's how we measure those terraces. And we can, yeah, max out at 3 of those.
So if I'm reading the summary properly, there is a proposed change to the ordinance, and that's adding additional language that an additional engineering, risk analysis may be required.
So that's the piece you weighed in on at the last planning commission meeting. We're still recommending no change there, which you have a positive recommendation on. But what we did is, because this was all inclusive of the same code section to save time and really energy and posting time frame and time for the property owner. We rolled it backwards into the same staff report. So you're having like a +1 consideration
Okay.
tonight on the
Okay.
previous staff report.
Okay.
The other recommendation still stands that we add that language to the code of permitting this additional engineering. If needed,
Scott, I obviously don't like making decisions based on this, obviously, but
based on that.
based on the question I'm about to ask. Drum roll. But what would the impact be to the applicant if this is not adopted? I mean, are we talking about a tear down situation or non-conforming?
Well. Yes, there's a bunch of things that can happen. They could work with their downhill property owner, the neighboring property owner to regrade the lot. So they can vary the number of feet of the wall that they need to vary. They can cut down the wall and re-terrace. I mean, they can do a bunch of things. And this isn't like this didn't, in my opinion, this didn't creep up on the property owner. We made them aware of the requirement. It was clearly stated in the building permit that at the completion of the project, you will have no more than 8 feet of wall exposed. And I think that it's just it's a request at this point. The wall exists and they're seeing if they can keep the wall as it is. The downhill property owner has appealed to the council in this case, saying that they'd rather have the taller wall than the regrading of their yard and, changing of their landscaping. But it's to the council. This is a recommendation, so you'll make a recommendation based on staff or your feelings about it. Like we said before, I think we briefly touched on this, that 8 feet isn't a marker of, it's not like a marker of wall safety. It's not a marker of really anything other. I think it comes out of aesthetics. So you can build a safe 11-foot tall wall or 12-foot tall wall. But 8 feet doesn't seem to be overly restrictive when we look at state code. So whatever number you choose is really just a number you can live with for the tallest exposed concrete or faced wall that you'd expect in the city.
I'll share my thoughts later on literal values and code, but that's for the discussion.
And a good example of that is we have a 35-foot building height. There's not any reason why it couldn't be 40 feet. It just is 35.
Aesthetics.
It's a literal value.
Well, one question I had is we have our limit of, 98% of our walls are boulder retaining walls. Is there a way that we can get that? It seems like that if we can allow those to be up to 8 feet would help in a lot of situations. But it would be more like, and I don't know how, again, at the end of the day, especially with those, it's construction and the way they're built, but if there was some way that inspectors could look at that simply and say, okay, you can go up to 8 feet if there's no more than 3 rows of rocks. So that means you're using some pretty big rocks, which then kind of offsets that risk of somebody taking, I'm thinking of a lot of walls up there where they just harvest what's on the ground and around the house and they're 1 foot tall. And they just build this 5-6 foot tall wall and it's just essentially like gravel on this straight up and down bank of dirt. And
We're not.
Remembering your parents
My parents had some big rocks fall.
from a collapsing retail.
Right now, we're not.
It was in
making-
September.
We're not making any recommendations on the boulder walls. So those are the 4 feet and less. You don't have to have engineering on any retaining walls. So that's, creosote logs to 4x4 stacked on each other. I mean, any number of like home landscaping type of projects, 4 feet and under, not engineered. From 4 foot to 6 foot, or I guess up to 6 foot and beyond 4 feet, you can have a boulder retaining wall that is engineered. So you have to have engineering on that 4 and 6. Engineering on a stacked boulder wall typically looks like some sort of drainage and a base course material that wall is sitting on. So you make sure that there's a firm enough base that the wall is, rooted into the ground. Usually they bury the toe of that lowest rock, and then it's really up to the operator to stack those in a way that kind of interlocks them together in a safe way. But those are maxed out at 6 feet. We don't have a lot of, if you have a retaining wall on your property that needs to exceed 6 feet, you're likely into some sort of engineered solution. What we're running into is the extremes of two property owners where we had one in the cove that ended up being 14 feet tall, because one lot was really high, one lot was really low. And we allowed them to bury the bottom 6 feet of that 14-foot tall wall with another tier. Basically like come out and.
Yeah, and that very wall's leaning like this. If you look at it,
Address that now.
yeah,
Uh,
it looks like it's got a bulge in it, and it,
yeah,
I watched that, when that happened, I don't know the type of wall it is. I don't recall them ever putting geogrid behind the wall like it's supposed to have. So you got 14 feet just stacked, otherwise it wouldn't be flowing out, because I thought their driveway was built when they did their wall, but
well,
anyway. It just seems like what comes up to me a lot, whether through the builders talking with the inspectors or whatever, is that is governing the boulder retaining walls, because they are always right there. And and I guess maybe it's that is trying to keep those exactly, you may end up with one rock and all of a sudden, well, this one rock makes it 7 feet tall, but the rest of the wall is, and I would assume they take that into consideration when they're looking at them, but.
We measure to the dirt behind the wall. So
So,
it's not it's not the
So we
boulder.
dig the dirt out and have the wall, and then once it's done, okay, fill it back in through landscaping. Eric?
Could I see something?
Yeah,
Yeah, so when I go and look at walls, mostly rock walls, what we're having trouble with is mostly at the entrances of the homes. That's where we're really having the trouble, is right there at the front door.
mhm.
Because they're trying to get, a nice looking front entrance, and so they're having to come up.
And then they just put the house way high and it's so close to the street, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, now what do we do?
Right, and now instead of being laid back, right, it's more of a vertical, right? And so, and there are ways to build the rock walls, it's where you put a curtain drain behind it, right? With some soil reinforcement and that to hold the rock onto the soil, right? That specific wall, a lot of these rock walls aren't inspected while they're being built. That's one of the trouble that we're running into, is that the engineering is done after the fact. And so what's under those rocks? No one knows, right?
When you
So
go out to inspect it, you don't know what's behind it.
I don't know what's underneath it. Yeah, and so what I've asked a lot of the builders to involve me early on, right? Have me come out, let's look at it, let's, as you start to build the wall, keep me informed, and I'll come out at intermittent times and we'll take a look at it. And as we build it, that way when we get engineering back, I can understand it a lot easier, and I can be like, yep, I believe what they're saying. I think, I agree with what they're saying, and they can, it sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Right. So, but yeah, I mean, like Scott said, I mean, there's larger rock walls than 6 feet and 8 feet that are I would consider safe. And so really it comes down to aesthetics, right? I'm trying to prevent neighbors going against neighbors because of the height of their walls, really is what it comes down to. So, and the construction with water and rodents and that digging within the walls. So, that wall that failed on the reinforced concrete wall that failed, that's still under investigation. I haven't viewed and whether or not they've excavated the base of that and on how the failure happened.
That was a concrete
On that.
wall.
It was a concrete.
Oh,
wall.
it wasn't boulders.
No, it was reinforced concrete. Yeah, and so, yeah, the center section of it is the part that failed. And so the corners and everything was still remaining. Yeah, that's the wall as it was constructed. And that's the wall currently.
Commissioner Watson, that home may look familiar to you. No? We'll talk after.
Okay. Yeah,
and I just want to point out that Eric's has a much, his opinion matters more than mine on. So I said the wall probably would have failed, who knows?
That looks like their footing wasn't big enough. The
Actually, I don't know.
horizontal bar was not.
Had an 8-foot.
Right.
The thing that seems to be missing is any rebar pinning those pieces together.
Yeah, that is one thing. It failed along that line right there. You can see the expansion joint that was added there, an expansion material. And there was no reinforcement connecting those two sections of the wall, which I would have expected to have. in this type of wall. If you can see some cracks that are kind of going at a 45-degree angle. Yeah, if you squint, you can kind of see it. Yeah, along that one side there on the left.
Is that prior to the building?
That is prior to the failure, yes. Yeah, when we start seeing 45-degree angled cracks such as that, there's already beginning to be a problem. There's already pressure behind the wall that is causing the wall to come under stress. As we see those cracks appear.
And one clear, and it's in a different section than the part that built.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
Side.
Yeah, it failed along this joint there. Is where it was.
Having
So
had
far.
that in my family, my heart goes out to the
Yeah,
homeowner there. That's a scary and expensive thing. It's too
Yes.
bad.
Right, yeah, it is too bad. And so they're investigating that right now, so on what the causes could have been at that time.
For construction.
So I just have to ask the questions. You had mentioned that with all the rain we've had all over the city, there are issues with retaining walls. On the flip side, you said, well, it doesn't matter what height, that it's just aesthetics, but the ones that we're seeing failing all over the city, are there common characteristics? Is it mostly new construction? Is it mainly boulders? Is it high, low, or is it just all over?
It's kind of all over. A lot of it, there's ways that you can handle, the main thing on these walls is water, right? This one, like, if I were to offer just kind of a rudimentary opinion on this, would probably be caused by water that was behind the wall, that caused pressure behind it, that forced the wall over. And so if you give away a place for the water to leave the wall from behind the wall and not sit behind it and cause pressure behind it, then it's relatively safe. Then you're able to get that pressure from behind the wall. And so in this case, I didn't see any weep holes or anywhere. A lot of time on the rock walls, they install what they call a curtain drain or a kind of a deep French drain that allows the water to collect in there and then run out to the sides or in some predetermined path.
Escape somehow.
So are we gonna keep this picture up during our discussion? I have some comments about it, but we're not in our discussion.
Yeah, I'm just curious about if we're saying, oh, well, our ordinance is fine and we could even go further because it's only aesthetics, but then on the flip side, it's like, well, if we're having failures all over the city with water, is it
Well, and I don't
newer
think we have-
construction or is it?
How many walls do we have fail? I don't know of any besides
Is
this.
that all over? the
Yeah.
city?
I got
No, not failure.
Not
No.
failures. No, what we've had is a lot of water washout and a lot of water in a very short amount of time. On dry soil, and so we have, like, here's one, this is the property owner who sent us a video of their neighbor's water rushing onto theirs, and that water, some of that water ultimately ended up down their basement stairs to their basement entrance, which luckily went out the land drain, which works until the land drains are full of water and then those back up, and so in a long enough heavy rain event, that could have turned into basement flooding.
Yeah.
But what it turned into was a big pile of ruined grass. So that washed out a whole bunch of dirt and rock and sand out onto just a fan on their grass.
Okay.
But that sort of thing there is, it's a civil issue. So
Mm.
those walls could have.
Well, that's just not having their SWIP.
Yeah, but it's not having the uphill lot created in a way that keeps their water on their site.
Right, and in a lot of places, we do have some areas where we have swales, ditches, basically, right? That we collect the water and then send it down into the detention basins where we can manage it more. And a lot of places, either the swales have not been maintained or they're filled in, and we're looking at a lot of those right now to try to manage those.
So if I understand, there's really nothing wrong with code, it's mainly construction. What happens after construction for the property?
Yes, there are a lot of issues with inspection and trying, not issues with inspection, but it's just the construction of the walls
It's not the
and just
code.
verification of the.
Yeah, so it's not the code itself.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of engineering,
Mhm.
right. Correct.
And you've seen it, you've driven up to Logan, up through Manaway. I mean, UDOT has some extremely tall walls that are fine, they're holding, but it's about how they're engineered, how they're built.
Right, yeah, and a lot of those walls are laid back You know, they're not vertical, they're reinforced, they've got soil nails, yeah. There's a lot of engineering within it.
It's not the water adding weight, it also lubricates the soil, that they'll remove easier.
It could, yeah. Luckily, in these areas, we have really good soils up there. They're very stable, really rocky. And so, yeah, the soils haven't been an issue that I've found so far in a lot of these issues. It's really just undercutting of the water and the water loading behind it.
Do you feel that our current ordinance, as it is in the city, protects the city from liability if, you know, there's some big calamity and half the, you know, hillside comes down or something? That happened a few years ago in Salt Lake, which may be why we had looked at this ordinance then. But do you feel our ordinance and our process currently protects the city from liability if there is a real issue on one of the hillsides?
I think it does. It's just really just an inspection and trying to get out there and look at the walls. There's a lot of walls that are constructed that I never see until after the fact. Or if ever.
And you just have to trust that it's been built as per the engineering specifications.
Yes, yes. And anything over 4 feet, then I ask for engineering, a letter of engineering stamped by a PE. Verifying that it is stable in their opinion.
Great, thanks.
Okay, any other questions for Eric? Thank you. Before we get into our discussion, we'd invite the public to comment on this item. If anybody's here that'd like to step up to the mic and address us.
You know I was coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chris Culver, 3979. Anyways, I looked by the wall in question, at the D's wall. Anyways, I guess the point, being not a civil engineer, but an aeronautical engineer, same stuff, but different areas. But understanding that it's the water and the pressure and watching them build the wall, I understand that it is not structural that I'm worried about. There's nothing. As he stated, it's all aesthetics. I guess the true question I have is there's a couple of definitions in here about finished height of the wall. And we keep talking about that. You don't measure it technically, at least the way I'm reading it. It's the finished grade on top and the finished grade on the bottom. So if that wall sticks up 4 extra feet, it's the finished grade. So if the wall's here, but its finished grade is down here, you measure it from there to here. So it's not the wall height top to bottom. So I guess the question in my mind is that right now, the Ds don't have it up to that height. And so is it 11 feet? Is it 8 feet? You know, understand. So I'm kind of splitting hairs there, but I guess my point is that you can have a 13-foot wall, but if you have finished grade and finished grade being 8 by definition. So, I mean, really, when we're talking about aesthetics, yeah, you can have a 13-foot wall showing and still meet the code. So I guess in my
Above that 8 feet, then whatever's not buried would be considered fence. And so it falls under the fence rules.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff in here, and I guess, you know, when it comes right down to it, you know, there should be some kind of waiver process, and I'm looking at the table at the beginning of the whole drainage standards. You know, if I'm reading it right, the city engineer has the authority to waive anything. Of course, this is something before 2018, which I thought the lot was in existence before then, but because I bought my lot in 2018. So I'm kind of wondering if that's something that's still able to do. So, I mean, really at this point, I'm looking to get around not having them grade up 4 feet in my yard, because I think my landscaper would kill me because, let's see, he's a prima donna, but definitely he had a plan and that wasn't part of the plan. Also, the neighbor next to me that is adjacent to the wall as well has a swing set that she's not moving because she buried her swing set probably 4 feet in the ground with cement. Again, she'd have to move it. So I think there's a lot of considerations involved that do not include regrading or weird boxes on the bottom that look sort of like something that would have flowers in it. I mean, there's a lot of different things that, yes, we could do, but in the grand scheme of things, you know, it is what it is. And if you change things, it's going to look more weird, in my opinion. And the the thing that my wife keeps saying is that anything on our side of the fence or our side of the wall is gonna look like something that we're doing. So in my opinion, anything weird is gonna come on us, why did they do that? You know, so, and if it's aesthetics and you just pile 4 feet of rocks on top, again, it looks weird. So I think if there's not some sort of waiver process, I think, you know, to me, I agree that the 8-foot requirement is not really the issue. It comes to, is there a collective neighborhood, I don't even know what to call it, coordination process. And I think Scott and I talked about this a little bit, you know, that's not what you stick in the code. Got it. But if there's a waiver process or something like that, then, you know, I think that's kind of the key thing that I'm looking for is, you know, anyway, to have to do what we have to do to get it to 8, agree that it's not, you know, the D's knew what they were doing. I'm not trying to say they're not, but it is what it is at this point. At least from my standpoint. I don't want to change it. Anyway.
Sir, I have a question
Yeah.
for you. Again, you don't have to answer or anything, but I'm struggling to understand why someone, so you're on the downside of this,
Correct.
So what I'm earnestly struggling to understand is how someone on the downside would support a rock wall or a stone slab that's higher than 8 feet. Because so help me understand, because I would think like, oh, this giant thing, oh, we hate that, we want it set back more. And I would think you'd be here arguing against it. And where you're arguing for it has got me like, thinking, am I thinking this clearly? Help me out.
You didn't create this problem.
Yeah, that's exactly.
You didn't create this problem, but I feel like now you're
I-
being forced
from the
to
beginning.
solve this problem.
True, but from the beginning, I think one of the biggest, I've lived in North Ogden since 99. Anyways, and I've been in several different houses, one, all with weird natural rock walls at some point. And weeds, erosion, rodents, snakes, tarantulas, all of that stuff live in there. And I don't care how well you do it, you're gonna have problems later on. So, you know, when we built this house, I don't know if you've seen our house, but there is not a rock wall anywhere around. You use the Keystone system, and you were talking about
I
the
believe you showed
geogrid.
pictures last time of your home,
Yeah,
right? We saw that rock wall, just for reference, last time.
but
Or not that rock wall, but stone.
stone stuff, right? And so, I mean, I understand the engineering part of it, the earthquake proofness of stuff. That's a key thing too. No one talks about that, but to me, combination of all of that is what we're talking about. Anyway, to answer your question specifically, with all of those, what I would call cons of having a rock wall or something like that, a straight, clean look to a wall, obviously he hasn't faced it yet. That other person didn't face it at all, which I thought was weird. But well, I can't remember if I was reading it somewhere about the color too. Is that in one of the other?
It's in one of the
Okay.
city's recommended ordinance.
To me, I thought that's brilliant, because what if we say, make it, I don't know, some off-tone tan that blends right into the landscape, that it disappears almost. I mean, to me, the clean look of it versus a rock wall with weeds that look like they're ours, snakes coming out of them. Like you said, the water just coming down, doesn't matter how you control it, it's gonna come down. And where does it come? Comes here. So to me, that wall was to keep deer out too. Can't forget about deer. It's the other menace, not just water, but deer. Up against there, they had that much, I don't know, a lot of standing water on top. And with the weed poles and everything else, not a bit fell on my property or next door. So to me, it's and that wasn't fully cured either. So they had stanchions or dead man's back. They had a whole bunch of different things that, I don't know what they did here, but I felt I would stand next to that in a deluge of water, knowing that that's not going to come down. So structurally, to me, it's aesthetically pleasing because I can add stuff to it. If I really wanted to, I could put a bush next to it. Could I do that with other things? Probably, but this, I don't have to worry about all those other cons that I would have with a natural rock wall. And people say, oh, you can weed it, you can do this, you can do that. You haven't lived with one for more than a couple of years, I guess, because they are a pain.
So I have both in my backyard.
Yeah.
I have a rock wall that's about, well, I mean, it's Terrace, and it probably doesn't conform. Okay, and then there's a 4-foot thing of lawn, and then I have a cement wall. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because my own thought has been, oh man, I would not want that concrete wall to be any higher than, because it is for my neighbors down the street. The wall gets higher and higher as you go down the street a little bit, you know? And I thought, oh man, I'd hate to have one of those houses, because they've got 8-9 feet of concrete wall. I only have 5 feet, 6 feet or so, and I felt lucky. It's interesting to hear that perspective, that it's preferred, because when I look at that, I see an eyesore, and beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? There's nothing universal that says that's an eyesore.
True, but I mean, I have natural oak trees in there. I have all these other fire pits, all this vinca, you know, everything else that's basically covering it. A shed next to it that I started putting Christmas lights up today, but anyway, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, it doesn't really see it. So I mean, if it's not bam, stark like this, there's nothing there. We have, you know, 50 feet of solid concrete. It's not the case, you know, and so that to me is one of the things that, you know, I was been looking to try to figure out, is there a waiver process? Is there something that we can say, yeah, barely, you know, the downhill neighbor gets 95% of the vote? I don't know. I'm just trying to scratch my head and come up with something that, in this case, yes, 8 feet, not disagreeing about that in the code. However, is there a waiver process that aesthetically pleasing to me, you know, is something else? And
Yeah, if I may be blunt here, the thing that I'm weighing here is, I think most people, I think, and I could be wrong, would not want a big thing of concrete in the back. Like if their neighbor started building, they'd be like, but here you are saying, no, I want that.
Yeah.
And so
in fact,
I want to do this to protect people downhill, and here's somebody saying that he wants that, and you're probably in the minority, I think.
I would guarantee it. But I'd love to, if I had the money, I would have continued that cement wall all the way as far as I could to the end of my lot to the east. Because there's several options, I can't say too much, but the person that owns the lot, there's reasons for that. Anyway, these are probably being to you guys' existence too, but as high as I could and just carried across. You know, there's a lot of can't remember the saying about good fences and good neighbors, but in some instances that's true. I mean, with a neighbor to our east, no fence. She's great. You know, grandkids come on over, take all the acorns you want. You know, so, but you know, but there's certain instances, like you said, that I don't want to. But city code says this, yada, 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 but is there something in there that says consideration? And that's really all I'm asking, so.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other comments? Anyone online?
Just Johnson, oh wait. His hand's not raised right now.
Okay. Discussion, recommendation?
It's so hard when 100% of the testimony we hear supports something that I think, to be frank, I think most of the city wouldn't want, but yet it's wanted. And the reason the ordinance exists is to protect the people downhill, right? And it's so.
Well, that's the big thing I have, the big question of is why? Like what happened in the city that all of a sudden we needed to govern all of this? And it was at a time when all of a sudden it was the same things that came in that said, hey, we should only have 1-story houses and we should have all that. And like, why is it the city's responsibility to govern what your view is out of your house?
Well, I think that's what the residents have asked of us, is to maintain.
But have they?
Well, I think.
Because the only one that's come in and said, hey, I want that there.
Fair point, but I think the purpose of when we build any ordinance, it's to protect whatever the charm and character and the well-being and all of the neighborhoods and stuff, right? When we say how wide the street should be, and there's no universal handbook for this. So I think this would be born, because if I lived in the house with the trailer and I was there first, and my neighbor came and put in their home, and then step 2, they put in their yard, I'd be like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. I would love that there was some ordinance that would protect me now, because that wall in and of itself, I don't find offensive, but if it were 17 feet high, I think I would. And so there should be a standard.
And the thing I look at is you look at that, and so this lot down below where the trailer is, they've got a few terraces of rock walls 3 of them or 4 of them going up to that. You look at the elevation on the bottom of that concrete wall, and then you look at where their deck is in their basement. Now, if you turned that to terraced rock walls, you wouldn't have anything but strips of terraces
No.
from one house to the next.
Yeah.
Which then says, okay, the subdivision wasn't designed with consideration of, hey, this is what the
Yeah.
rules are.
And we see those
And-
homes going in.
And this
Absolutely
subdivision,
no way to have a backyard.
well, I don't know what, I mean, I know the rule in there that we have in 2018 is because subdivisions were built before this rule for that exact reason. Of like, hey, we may not have enough room behind 2 houses to terrace walls all the way between them. I think the subdivision was built after, I don't know, but this particular one, but those are some of the issues, and you look and say, again, why? You know, why does the city step into it, especially because if the whole reason is aesthetics and saying, well, we want to protect the view of the neighbor, then what happens in the instance like the one wall Eric talked about is all these people in the front of their house. Well, that doesn't block anybody's view. You know, if somebody comes out their front door and
Can
says,
I
hey,
make a
because my house is
clarification there?
here.
Sorry to cut you off, but I don't think that we're talking so much about protection of the view as a protection of what they view from their home. Right, so I'm not saying, hey, they have an inherent God-given right to see Benoit Peak. I'm not saying that, but when it's 22 feet off your back porch, then I think that's not necessarily your view. That is, like, your view to me is this macro view that you have,
Mhm.
but when it's your neighbor, that's,
So yeah, so turn that around. What if that was the front of the house and the street? That was the wall between the house, this front door and the street. Like, no, it's too tall. I mean, it would look weird from the street, agreed. But- I mean, there's, because some of the walls that I know have come up and that have had issues is stuff between the front of the house and the street up in the cove that the house, that it's, whether the lots are so high or it's so steep and everything, they've terraced walls all the way down to the street. And I mean, some of them, a couple of the first houses up there before this ordinance was even in place have walls that then, same reason, wouldn't really comply, but it's
What
in the
you've
front of
seen
the
is that,
house.
that they want it higher than 8 feet.
Well, no, well, that's where I said boulder walls, usually if they could go 8 feet.
Yeah.
You don't really see too many of them. They're
Yeah.
much more than, I mean. Well, I know a project that's,
Mhm.
you know, it's 9 or 10 feet high. But it's that having just a little bit more room. Because, I mean, to me. The aesthetics of it, when you look at it, a boulder wall looks, in my opinion, a lot better than a cement wall,
Agree.
as long as it's maintained, you know, because the weed issue and all that is real. And that's the other thing, is you build a boulder wall on your property line up below your house. Your neighbor's staring at weeds all the time because the person who lives there isn't climbing down the wall to weed it.
Mhm.
yeah, and I do agree with
But-
our commenter. I think that concrete wall can be beautified in cool ways, right? You know, vertical garden. There's all sorts of ways to jazz that up, you know, vines and things like he's talking about, lights, I guess, but.
I'm not sure I'd be comfortable going higher than 8 feet, though. I don't
That's
know what
my-
your
that's my
guys
comment.
thought. That's what my dilemma is.
You know, we
8
struggle
feet
with
seems
this.
like a good limit.
We struggle with this all over anytime there's a literal value in an ordinance, right? Anytime the ordinance says, hey, a cul-de-sac can only be 250 feet. Well, someone comes in and says, where did you come up with 250 feet from? And the fact of the matter is, it's the standard. And so anyone's gonna wanna move it to their own.
Well, and I would probably say I agree. However, it's what do we have that can make those variances?
And that's what I was gonna say, what I think our gentleman here was saying was, okay, right, 8 feet, great, but what if,
Is there a
what
special
if-
circumstance?
yeah, what if, for someone like me who wants a big concrete wall, what, you know, is there a mechanism for that? And I don't know how to write that, but I wanted, the human in me wants to let him have it because it's his yard, right? Without.
Well, but it's not
damaging
even
the
his
next-
wall, so
I know,
that's the,
but it's what he wants.
yeah.
But so without damaging the next guy that comes in and says, I hate that my neighbor put this wall in that 13 feet high. If it was only 8 feet, right? So without damaging that guy, I don't know a way we could get him what he wants.
And
because
that's always the issue with
variances-
ordinances is we've got to apply it to the whole city. And the reason we kind of looked at this, if I recall, is because, you know, as they start building further up the hillside, and it became a particular I don't know if it was just the timing of it, it was the example that we used, but kind of that section that's just below the North Ogden Divide Road, kind of, I want to say
Mason,
about,
oh,
yeah,
no.
just below like
Hello.
3,100. And there were issues there, and that's when I think the city engineer came in and we really took a look at this, because there were, I don't know if you were, this is my recollection of things, that there were some issues with it, and we knew that as the the construction was gonna go up the hillside, that we needed some more specific ordinances.
I think you're gonna boo and hiss at this idea, but
Uh,
what, and so feel free.
Mm.
But like, okay, so we can't say, there's no variance that's gonna allow this to happen. Just, so a variance has to meet these requirements set out by the state, has to be a safety or, right, and it's just not gonna help. So we can't just say, oh, we'll apply for variance and we can grant that. That's impossible, I believe, okay? But what if we do have things like landscaping review and site plan review, and sometimes when things, what if, I don't know, if the wall were to exceed 8 feet, there needs to be a review of it by somebody like us. And this is where everyone's gonna probably go against, okay? And because I would say, yeah, if the landowner was going to put vines up it and Christmas lights and, barn doors or whatever it is that's gonna beautify it, and that meets the recommendation of the body, and I would say that they could, yeah, I'd be for it in that situation. But to just say, yeah, I can be 15 feet now, I think we're just moving our stick in the mud. And
I also, in the back of my mind, it's sort of like, well, the person who built the wall knew what the ordinance was, built the wall not to spec anyway, and now it's the downhill's neighbor's problem to solve. And here he is, where I'm having a little issue with this. So now we're going to change the ordinance to sort of just, allow him to build whatever he wants, instead of he needs to fix the problem.
yeah, well, I think our downhill neighbor doesn't want to fix the problem because he doesn't want to grade his yard different. I
Well, why should he have
completely
to?
understand that. Right.
Why should he have
So,
to?
but that whole issue is that there was a wall that was constructed that exceeded the ordinance. There's nothing that said that wall had to be 2 feet from that uphill property owner's property. It could have been 6 feet and he could have regraded it on his own property. There's nothing to say that wall couldn't have been built at 6 feet with a 6 foot separation and another 6 foot tall wall, thereby losing 6 feet of backyard, but getting to 12 feet high. I mean, there were a series of self-imposed decisions made here that you're right, the downhill property owner is attempting to protect his own landscaping and his interests by accepting a wall that's too tall in this case and
Having
so-
us change the ordinance for the city, so
it's that's one.
I'm having a little issue with.
And then there was a
Internal.
text group that was happening, but taller walls, I'm not saying this wall's gonna fail. This one seems exceedingly built very well, but the taller the wall is, when they fall down, the further away from the point, they're the point at the bottom, fulcrum, they fall. So in this particular case, everybody should feel really lucky that wall failed in a way that only impacted landscaping. But at 12, at 14, at whatever height, that you just don't know what's going to happen if you do have one of those taller
Yeah.
walls fall, especially when they're, the height of that wall system by ordinance as a tiered wall system is probably like 25 feet tall by the time you start to add all the rocks, because the downhill neighbor, their first tier of rocks is really holding the footing of that tall wall. And then the next one's holding the foot, like it's just a series of walls, and they probably should have been designed in concert as opposed to the bottom home got built first and they did theirs, and then the uphill home comes in and builds theirs. But at any rate, just personally, I feel like we have a self-imposed issue that really we're attempting to kind of work around. And that's really blunt to say,
Yeah.
but there was nothing inherently unique about that lot, that property, the location of that wall, aside from I want a flat backyard, and this is a way to maximize my flat backyard.
And the lower lot owners don't have to give permission for the wall to be fixed on their property.
Right.
I mean, another way to fix this wall would be to saw it off at the top and make it shorter, but,
and scoot some of it back.
or tear it down and rebuild it. But there's other opportunities, but obviously they're gonna be looking at the cheapest way to do it. But it is, it is a little frustrating.
Yeah.
From the building inspector's side where it was made very clear when this was first even proposed that it wasn't gonna meet the standards.
Right.
And that there would have to be fill on the bottom and things and that now it's been even scooted so close to the neighbor's property line that the only way to fix the issue is to grade the neighbor's property from the upside owner or cut the wall down. Like
Even
it's-
to bury just the foot of the wall. This way, as I understand, I don't know how deep the wall is, but it's.
I mean, is that the only obstacle? You tear the wall down and rebuild
well,
something?
They could
else?
chop the top off, but
So it's like here, and this distance here is only about 2 feet. But to even bury up to 30 inches, you're either gonna have like, I don't know what they're gonna do. They built a wall really tall, really close to their property line, and they didn't sink it in the ground far enough to create frost protection for the foot.
So I agree with all of that. So in the sense of, you knew better and why did you do it?
Yeah.
That's their responsibility to fix it.
Mhm.
Aside from that wall, it really comes doin to, in my opinion, is if walls do get taller, what is like, if there's a situation, say this isn't built and they come in and say, oh, hey, my neighbor says he'd rather have a cement wall there than retaining. Is that an issue to say, okay, well, as long as it's built right, it's okay. But I go back to saying, in my opinion, is if it's a vertical engineered wall, we can allow a shorter distance between them as a terrace to help the person. It all has to be engineered right, but in, 2 8-foot concrete walls take up 16 feet of horizontal space. If it's engineered where you can have a 4-foot space between the two walls and plant something in there to help break that up, that's where I go back to say I'd be fine with something like that. But to me, the cement walls are, it's the not our city engineer, it's the design engineer's responsibility to make sure they're done safe. And when it comes for the aesthetics, the bad thing is I look at it and be like, well, if you're in there before and nobody else is around you, then no harm, no foul. And people that come in after, it's like, well, they know it. But when I say nobody else around you, meaning even an empty lot, the person who owns that lot has an inherent right to it, whether it's the developer still or whatever, but and that's the hardest thing to say, oh, well, if the neighbors don't care, then why should we?
Right.
But we know very well, we don't want to put the burden on the neighbor to be like, well, the city said, if you give me permission, I can do this. And then they feel guilty about telling them they don't want that wall. But to me, it's just the big question of why we even get into this. Like, the boulder walls are the issues that I see so many of them that are built so poorly that, fortunately up there on the hill, the soils are, they about don't need any walls to hold them anyway. It's so rocky and just, but when you get to other parts, like over where this wall's at, and it's straight, 1/2-inch rock sand, it holds the water, or you get down lower in the city and there are other places where it's clay, that's a different story. But so that's always the factor, but so to me, it boils back down to why, because then when something inevitably fails and it's like, well, your inspector,
Okay.
a bad builder did it, got away with it, and the homeowners 3 years later, there's something fails and it's like, well, he didn't build that to code. Well, why didn't the inspector call it? Well, they missed it, and it's like, to me, it just puts the city in more of a situation that we're gonna be involved with.
Yeah.
Because we're governing it,
That's my
you know,
concern
it's-
too.
so
but
and any language that would be proposed should not, I would actually really hesitate to include anything that says this is allowed if approved by the city
I
engineer.
told you
because
doing his.
that puts us 1 foot into the process as opposed to here's the max height. If it's properly engineered, then when Eric's looking at it, he'll specifically look at it and say, they've got the right information, looks like they've done calculations, but he's not verifying their
So
math.
when I recommended that, it wasn't based on any kind of structural review, it was aesthetics. And I see that that's why I tried to make the comparison to having a landscaping plan approval, right? Is this aesthetically offensive or not? That's why, and I was thinking out loud with that, to be honest with you. I know I've been in this role long enough that I know we generally don't like to see that. I've voted against legislation like that before, so, but I'm just trying to think, how do you give people what they want? Because,
Well,
and I don't have a way to do that.
and what I'm saying is from a legal perspective, it's better just to say this is is it 20 feet tall? If it's engineered right, I mean, picking a number, because as soon as you give that wiggle room, then it just pulls the city in a little deeper into the conversation if something ever happens.
Yeah.
And it might, I mean, it could even just be there's no height restriction, but because that's a number too. It's just an infinity number. Because it's as soon as you start saying it's this height at this level and it you know what I mean, the more we get involved, the more likely we will get sued. Because obviously, we don't know all the details of this wall, but we'll find out eventually. Was it built wrong? Was it designed wrong? Was it something the homeowner did after the fact? Like there's a whole lot of things coming into it. It's probably going to be a mix of those three.
Mhm.
It just, you never know. The nice thing about it is currently at the state level, and I'm not saying this is, we do our best as inspectors. In fact, home builders don't love the city because we're kind of turds about inspections. But state law says we can negligently inspect homes and we still have no liability. Because it's up to the home builder to make sure homes are safe and habitable. And so this falls a good example where no one should be able to sue the city because it's up to the home builder and the engineer to design and build stuff safely. So, sorry, that's my little soapbox.
So I feel it'd be productive to, to make a recommendation, talk to it or against it. But I don't know how is there anybody who has a?
Let's make a motion, we'll see where we're at. If you feel strongly about
I know,
it.
as I started saying that, I thought they're gonna turn it back on me, and I don't have, to be honest with you, I don't have, in the absence of having something better, okay, I don't have the tools and a legal tool chest to come up with something to help this situation that drove this. In the absence of that, I move that we recommend the ordinance stay as is. And now, if we talk to that and don't agree with that, that's fine, but at least we can go in some
Yeah,
direction
we got
and
something.
end
to
this
say.
conversation after we deliberate on it. So I make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion, a second discussion. I mean, one comment that I would look at, and I know this is just wall heights, but I keep going back to the majority of the walls in the city are boulder walls. And if we say, well, you can't go over 4 feet, you'd have to have engineering, you can't go over 6 feet. Well, it has to have engineering, then why not just let it be 8 feet too? I mean, it's the engineer that's gotta do it. Why do we have this 6 foot number that says you have to have it engineered,
It's 8
but
foot.
it still has to be 2 feet
It's
lower?
8 foot, right?
Boulder walls
For
only have to
rock,
be
for
6.
boulders.
But you still have to have an engineer. So in my mind, it's like, well, if you have to have an engineering, then the all heights should be the same. The engineering requirement might be different, obviously, but. Because I think in theory, a cement wall has to be engineered, whether it's 2 feet or 10 feet, but
So, Eric, given that I'm not like married to my own motion, do you have a recommendation to alter it or?
well, I would just, mine is that we treat all, the height of all walls be the same. So in our ordinance, it would just simply be is the boulder retaining walls could be up to 8 feet with engineering. They have to be engineered once they're over 4 feet. So we just say, well, if the engineer's engineering a 6 foot wall, why is it that much
My only
different for
comment
an
to
8
that
foot
is
wall?
where that sounds logical, there's no driving. There's no driving force. Nobody out there's wanting to do that.
Well, other than my experience with people and the issues with these walls that Eric has dealt with, in people's front yards and all that, that is the issue. Is these boulder walls needing a
We're gonna
little
say it
bit
again.
taller.
We are being proactive.
Yeah, I mean, since we're looking at it, and you, Commissioner, Commissioner Thomas, like Chairman Thomas, you would also mention something about possibly adjusting the distance between the walls for a terrace. Did you want to address
Well,
that at this time? or
I mean,
just-
that's really if on the concrete retaining walls, the engineered walls,
Okay.
if that is something that would be, I don't know how you address that of saying, well, that's, to me, that's, if somebody's wanting to go taller wall because they want that backyard, that is one give I think that we could make, is saying, okay, if it is a cement wall, because if you go 8 feet high and then do a terrace of 8 feet and then do another wall,
You need a lot
you've
of
got
coverage.
8 feet there that you've chewed up, that's really not useful for anything.
Mhm.
If it can be engineered where it's only 4 or 5 feet, then why not allow it? I mean, but in my opinion, it's plant some stuff in there. Now, I don't know how well that grows and how you say, oh, put some plants in there. Again, we're looking at just the aesthetics of it.
Still hard to
From that
maintain.
standpoint, but
So I've been asked to restate my motion to clarify it. And I remember the tools here would be alter my motion, shoot it down and vote against it and then submit something else that's actionable.
Or like an
Or
amendment.
I guess approve it, I guess. But just to restate the motion, it was that no legislative change be made to this ordinance.
Only, just for clarification, because I think that this will all now roll forward to the council. Is the planning commission still okay with the life safety changes in the previous part of the staff report? So it'd be no changes to the wall height, but we'll still permit the flexibility to come in on an engineered review for Eric, that what we talked about two weeks ago.
That I would like to restate my motion to include what Mr. Hess just said. Is that still seconded?
but what's your feeling about treating all walls the same? As far as heights?
My feeling is all over the map on this. My feeling is that the applicant should be able to put a 19-foot wall in his yard if he wants, but it also, sorry to keep going back to this, but it's also to protect the next guy. So my feelings are all over the place and they definitely include, I have nothing against bringing out those two points into alignment. So I could amend my motion to that if you'd like. Or you can amend my motion.
I think that would be good to just have it that way. I don't know. I mean, is there a reason that what's the reason why it was limited at 6 feet?
I have no idea.
The boulders.
Yeah, it was before my time. I have no idea. So,
It was a concern out of safety that if they fell, it's like with the concrete, when it fell in slabs. When boulder walls fail, you get scattered stuff.
Boulders coming down there.
Looks like that, yeah.
They help.
And, like Commissioner Thomas's point about the size of the boulders, I mean, he's done more earthwork than
Mhm.
all of us in the room combined. And that might be a valid part of any sort of a rock wall that, hey, no boulder can be smaller than, a quarter, 25% of the height.
I mean, from a safety standpoint, or in my mind, making it easier on the city and for those that have to look at it, is if we did put something in there saying, hey, no walls can have more than 3 tiers or 3 rows of rock in one individual wall. I mean, for a 4-foot wall, that's pretty small rocks, but there's 6 and 8 foot walls up there that have 12-inch rocks in them, and that's what, I mean, the rocks pop out and roll down the hill, the dirt doesn't go anywhere behind it, but to me, that's an easy check for the city side to say, hey, yeah, you've got a 6-foot wall there, but it's 4 rows, you need to use bigger rock. And then to me, that's a simple way to ensure safety. That's like, well, we're trying to do what we can to make sure even the poor quality builder maybe, or a guy that's trying to skirt around,
It's called the DIY wall.
I mean, I can't tell you how many people go up and, how many walls are built in the city where people just gone up on my ground and taken, because we say if you can pick the rock up, you can take it, and people with their wheelbarrows hauling 1-foot rocks out of there or in the back of their truck, and they're going home building walls out of them. And, but usually that's little landscape walls that probably aren't retaining anything, but I mean, that would be, I don't know if that is something that helps, the governance of the walls, even if it's like saying, hey, I mean, that might be hard when you're saying, well, we're trying to fit all these pieces together. Once in a while, you're gonna have little rocks, but
Yeah.
for the most part, when you look at it and say, oh, hey,
And I'll tell you what, every site plan that comes in, what every single one of them looks like is,
perfectly drawn circles.
there you go, it's gonna be this, and they're gonna all look just like this around my house, you know, here's my house. And then you get out there, and what they've actually done is like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're all 3'11".
and they're all,
Yes.
yeah, I'd be
But
more
that's
com-
the-
I mean, I'd be more comfortable in how we administer this and having just a top number. And then if they have an engineer that's willing to stamp those basketball sized rocks as a.
Well, yeah, I mean, those both work in harmony, like.
Yeah.
You go to an engineer and say, hey, I got a 6 foot wall here, I need you to engineer. Well, how big are your rocks? Well, they're 6 feet, it's one row of rocks.
Mhm.
Oh. He's like, oh, okay, that's fine. You know, but if you say, well, I used pea gravel and I just sprayed some water on it, hold there, but. So,
I think it's a great idea. I just worry about how we administer it in the field among all of the other things we have.
that makes it more difficult, however, it also, in the event that. Trying to get the tape measure and say, well, hey, exactly what this wall is. If we have it covered by an engineer, then that should be satisfied. The trouble is when an engineer looks at it, they're specifying, hey, this is what you need to build the wall out of, and then the guys don't do it anyway. Well, my wall's stamped, and they're like, okay, has the engineer come out and looked at it after it was built? And so. But that would be my recommendation, is just we treat all wall heights. If 8 feet's the number, then we use 8 feet, and rock retainingss are the same. They're required to be engineered anyway, so it's not like we're.
So I'd like to amend my motion to include bringing those two ordinances in line and having, and 8 foot be the standard on both engineered and rock walls.
I'll still second it.
And then,
So, you know, and all that talk about rock walls though, I mean, are we of the same mind that 8 feet should be the standard on the wall in question here, which is concrete? I mean, because if not, now's the time to shoot my motion down. And,
well,
I think it's.
I mean, in my opinion, the ordinance is the ordinance.
Yeah.
It's not any different than your parents' wall that was built 25 years ago. It wouldn't meet now it's not in the city, so it doesn't matter, but saying, well, it was built before the ordinance, so it doesn't apply, you know. I guess that would be the same with this wall. When it was built, the ordinance is this, and
Right. He needs to fix it.
and if we're not gonna change it, then they can take it up to the city council and try and. I mean, truly, it's hard, because in my opinion, like, if it was engineered right and the neighbors don't care about it, then.
yeah, that's what I struggle with.
I'm fine with it as well, but to try and put that in an ordinance form, it's like. We don't have legislative powers to say yes or no. We have to abide by our ordinances. That would be city council if they figure out they want to plug some loophole in, and
Give him a waiver.
let them be the ones that judge that.
And before we do any kind of vote, I'd really commend someone for coming here and sticking up for the neighbors to say, hey, either I gotta make my backyard worse, or he's gotta do this expensive thing to move his wall. And I just, I definitely commend our speaker here for coming down and throwing his hat in the ring for his neighbor, right? Like, that's an awesome thing. I wish I had neighbors like that, and I do. But I don't know if they re-terrace their lawn. I don't think I would terrace.
Well, yeah, and that, like I said, that's what's hard, right? I think the recommendation goes forward and like what you have made, and I think as the city council listens to minutes, it's important for us to understand is from an ordinance and a governance standard, this is what we want the rules to be. If there is a way for leniency because the neighbors don't want it, then they can decide that. I would be in favor of it, but I don't want to put future people in the
Mhm.
jeopardy to say,
That's always the
being a good
difficulty.
neighbor.
You know, there's always a very specific situation where a solution makes sense, but then it's always difficult to apply an ordinance that would fit the whole city, because there's so many just unique situations.
So question with 2 amendments to my motion, is there the city staff? Did we get it all?
You need more
Do you need
clarification.
on all? Can you do
Yeah, the motion as I have it is to recommend to city council to allow max height of all walls up to 8 feet. and recommend approval of the text that addresses reduction of loss of life property.
Yes, that is the motion.
You still second?
I still second it, yes.
Any other discussion? Let's call for a vote. Commissioner Watson,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Nancarrow,
Yes.
Commissioner Mason,
No. I'm kidding, it was yes.
You're no.
Commissioner Webb online.
No, it was almost not a.
Do we have?
Yes.
Yes. I know.
He's on here. Oh. It's my fault.
Yes.
I guess The speaker's muted.
Oh, okay.
He's trying
been
to say
talking
yes.
for 20 minutes and we're like.
I have all these things to add.
All right. I vote yes.
So for resident Chris, this is a recommendation of the city council. Typically, we have at minimum a skip meeting so that we have the not the minutes done, but recording and everything ready to prepare a staff report. So if, unless it's asked to be bumped up to the first meeting, the first meeting of the council, which is the second Tuesday of October, this will likely be heard on the fourth Tuesday of October.
Can I add to that? You know, we've seen many times where they, and I don't like this at all, that they disagree with us. You know, they're their own people with their own opinions and they may differ from ours. So it's I encourage you to go and speak your piece there and yeah, see what happens.
All right, item number 8. Zone text amendment 2022-7. Discussion and consideration and recommendation on legislative amendment to develop short-term rental regulations. Scott?
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the delay in this one that we had the first meeting to considering again tonight, but I went back through, I listened to the discussion again, and there were really two essential components that came out of that discussion item. That short-term rentals were recommended by the planning commission to be limited to only be in single-family homes, so no multi-family homes, short-term rentals. And then the second piece was that the owners of short-term rentals are required to provide a phone number and contact information for someone who can be reached by phone 24/7, as well as a person who can physically be at the house within 1 hour of a complaint. The piece, we had a conversation with the police chief this morning about if the owner or property manager is not responsive within pre-contact attempts, then fines will be assessed at this % daily. And he was we're still discussing whether or not this is a civil or a criminal situation. If it's a criminal situation, then you have a fine and then there's court date and everything else. If there's civil, there are some cases where there's a civil penalty, we can just issue a fine immediately and it's done. It doesn't have to be like a certified letter and then you go up and go through the whole code enforcement piece. So we're figuring out what that is in between, depending on what the planning commission does tonight, between planning commission and city council, we'll have that defined by state code, what we can do. Because the police chief said that in most cases, what they would probably do is just lean back on state code, what they can do to address a noise issue. It's like the issue of it being a short-term rental, and the reason that they got there, the knock on the door first, is kind of a lesser issue than what they're dealing with in that moment, whether it's like domestic violence or noisy neighbors or noise light complaint, parking complaint, whatever. Because in that case, they just allow their standard process to take over, whether that's homeowner, single family or rental, long-term or so with that, along with the other recommendations that came back before having the fire life safety response, and then also a rental business license, staff is recommending this to planning commission and for discussion, and then see if you want to recommend that on the council.
Okay.
I just had one area clarification. You said that it's restricted to single family homes. So if it's a townhouse, because it's zoned multi-family, then they would not be allowed there, correct?
Yeah, so
Even though if the townhouse only has a single, correct?
yeah, so we would write clarifying language. There's all sorts of creative ways that people call like townhomes or duplexes can be called attached single-family homes. We would probably classify any attached dwelling. This has to be a separate individual dwelling on its own lot, and so we'll write clarifying language. But for the planning commission's response, it was that based on the discussion we had, that seemed to be one of the major sticking points. Planning commission members felt like this should not be permitted in multifamily. Just for clarification, for the way state code works, is that if we have issued a business license to a multifamily home and they are effectively a legal non-conforming at this point, and it would be the city's burden of proof to show that they have abandoned that use for more than 1 year. So if they keep a business license in good standing year over year, then some of the multifamily short-term rentals that we have in the city right now could exist in perpetuity. But at change of ownership, or they haven't renewed that business license, then they would effectively lose that use.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions for Scott?
Pretty good.
All right, before we discuss, well, let's open it up to public. If anybody would like to comment on this item, please do so up at the podium.
Hi, I'm Sandy Cochran. I'm a North Ogden resident. And so am I correct in understanding that you have already agreed there's no way it'll be allowed in multifamily homes?
I don't think that's correct.
What, that's not correct?
That's the staff recommendation to planning commission.
I see. Okay, so then I'm gonna restate, the last time this was brought up, I came in and I opposed it, and I'm gonna restate my reasons and other issues I'd like to bring up. I'm gonna talk fast because I have a lot I want to say, and I only have 3 minutes. So I don't like the fact at all that they're allowed and that we have them in our multifamily homes at Prominence Point. I can't imagine being the parent of small children and knowing that my door's right here and this door right here could be a short-term rental. And every night, every day, there could be different people there. In our community, we're getting real close knit. We know who lives there, and when someone unusual is in the area, we will walk out and say, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you walking around?" With this stuff going on, we won't know who they are. The people who have been renting so far are not real good about following the rules of our HOA. And we don't have an HOA management on site. So you send an email in complaining, and 3 days later they respond and say, "Yeah, I've talked to the owner, everything should be fine." But so they usually have big vehicles, either like a big van or, huge SUVs. We have small driveways. They must be legal size, but they're fairly small. And so most of these vehicles block the sidewalk. Nothing makes me crazier than seeing a family walking with toddlers or pushing a stroller and have to go out in the street because someone's blocked the sidewalk. We have really narrow streets also, so that's not a comfortable place to be. So we have one lady, she lives right across the street from me. She lives in a patio home, not a townhome, single level, small patio home. She's 78 years old. She's about this big. She weighs probably 78 pounds. She's quiet, timid, goes to bed at 8 o'clock every night. So twice within a 6-day period, she had the short-term rental people at her door. 10:30 at night, they're punching a code into her keypad. The first time it happened, she was asleep. She didn't know it had happened. I watched from my guest room window because the only way a light shines in that window is if she's coming in or out of her driveway. And I saw a light shine and I looked at the clock and I said, "There's no way in hell she's leaving her house at 10:30 at night." So I watched these people punching in the keypad. They went back to their vehicle, got a piece of paper, came back and punched some more. They tried to punch in the garage code. And finally they left. Well, I got in my truck and I followed them. They went around to the next road. It took them forever to figure out they were going to one of the townhouses. but they see pictures when they rent. They have to make their reservation online. They see pictures of it. I don't know how they mistook a single level patio home for a 2-story townhouse, and it happened twice within a matter of 1 week. So just doing some research, I found some stuff that I'd like to share with you. Washington County, Utah, October of last year, banned unhosted short-term rentals, citing concern for supply of affordable housing. Orem City prohibits short-term rentals. Los Angeles, New York, Santa Monica, Las Vegas, and San Francisco all have at least one and some all of these requirements. The host must reside in the home. He or she must be a permanent resident in order to get a permit for the short-term rental. Investors can't rent property for less than 31 days. They can't have more than one listing. And if they are not residing in the home when it's rented, the first offense, they're fined $484. Repeat offenses are $968. Sedona, Arizona, in August of this year, started paying cash to Airbnb hosts who stop short-term renting. They're paying between $3,000 and $10,000, depending on the number of bedrooms. The strategy is catching on in other cities as popular spots try to take back housing for locals. City council officials approved the Rent Local program, which will pay hosts of short-term rental sites like Airbnbs and VRBOs to take down their listings and rent long-term at least 1 year to local workers. Getting back to the multifamily homes, it's just not, I just don't feel like it's right to allow people in there. They don't own the entirety of the walls in their place. The person on the other side of that wall is a partial owner, and we're getting, hopefully sometime soon, we'll be getting some amenities there. We've been waiting for a clubhouse and a pool and everything else for 2.5 years, but who's going to govern how we share those amenities with these people? I mean, how will we even know who they are? And that's another thing, the people renting these places, I don't even think they know who they're renting to. It's all done online. It's just scary having those people there. To me, it just feels like, taking a hotel and breaking it up and taking each room and just dispersing it all over the town. We're a community. We're trying to build relationships with our neighbors. These people don't fit in. I mean, if they're here on vacation, stay in a hotel. If you're here visiting family, stay with your family. If your family doesn't have enough room, sleep in the hotel and spend all day with your family. It just doesn't feel right to have them in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent testimony.
Anyone online?
No.
Okay, discussion, recommendation.
I think I made my position pretty clear last time we discussed this. I understand the tax implications and the reasons that the city or residents staff would be interested in having short-term rentals. I oppose them by and large throughout our town, not just in multifamily. I think for the reasons that we heard here, I oppose them in my neighborhood as well. I feel no obligation to provide an income stream to someone who already owns a home that goes and buys a second home to rent it out in this manner. In the same way, I would oppose them buying a home next to me and turning it into a dog food factory. I think it's a business, and by and large, I think we've made efforts to keep businesses out of our residential area, and I see this as no different. I know there's different opinions there, and acknowledge those and then there's many valid points, but I have overriding passion to keep this out because I wouldn't want my neighbors being a short-term rental. And it's something that you can't control always. You can't control your neighbors, right? I couldn't control if the Klopeks move in next door to me from, what's that movie?
The Burbs.
Thank you. I can't control that. And I wouldn't like it. Okay. But at least I rolled the dice on the fact that it was going to be resident and not someone that's super transient in nature and basically like a hotel. So I oppose short-term rentals throughout the city for the reasons that were stated here. And I love the testimony because there was evidence presented. Hey, this community, and whether or not it's true, I don't know, but I sure believe it, but this community opposed it for this reason. And one of the big ones is the housing crisis, right? I've said before, and I love my neighbor, and he probably would change his rock wall for me, but he owns 38 homes. And I see that as 38 families that can't share in the American dream of owning their own home because he owns 38 homes. I oppose it. Thank you.
Any other comments? I mean, my opinion, and I don't know. Right now, how many do we have in the city? Do we have a number?
I have 10 business licenses.
10.
And I
And we
went
got
out on
30
Airbnb,
Airbnbs.
VRBO, and there's somewhere between like 40 and 60 listings at any time. So I'm estimating, let's estimate high and then double it. So 200 out of 6,000 residences.
That's true. I should say without my rambling and passion speech, that the reasons for this were told last time were, let's bring these people out of the shadows and legitimize what they're already going to do anyway. My argument to that was, so why don't we legalize them cooking meth in their homes, right? And I don't know if that's a valid argument or not, but I understand that it's going to happen, and it is going to happen whether we. And I also don't oppose if it's owner occupied, because I think there's a vested interest in keeping your neighbors quiet and your place, the party atmosphere out of your place if you're living there. But if you're living in Centerville and renting a house up by North Ogden Divide because it's close to Powder Mountain and Nordic Valley even, go find another place go buy a hotel downtown.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw it, but there was an article in the local paper, I'm gonna say a month ago, since we last spoke about this. I think it was about Steamboat Springs, but it was a touristy kind of town, but the locals had no place to live. It was a huge housing crisis that they could, because everybody had turned their house into, a short-term rental that, like just workers to work at this resorts and things like that. They had a serious housing crisis. I don't know if I see that really applying to North Ogden anytime in the near future, but I do absolutely agree that areas that are zoned multifamily, it's not appropriate for this type of rental. Do I think we should have them? Probably not, but I recognize the reality that they probably will be here in the absence of any ordinance to regulate them. It could become more of a problem. So I could go either way.
Let's say I got my wish and we said, hey, we're not going to allow short-term rentals. There will be multiple applications for that over the next, there's going to continue to be applications for that. That's not going away. The demand is there. And I use these features, as you all do. When we go on vacation, we go to VRBO, right? But if nothing comes up, I go to Marriott.com and book a hotel, right? And that's what they'll have to do.
I think, it's hard. I'm probably more with Commissioner Mason. I don't feel obligated that we should have this be, oh, hey, here's a feature that everybody, granted, if somebody wants to subsidize some of their income or whatever in their home and rent out their basement, rent it out to long-term. We have them. So figuring out how do we govern that? How do we make rules for that? My opinion would be if we have to have them, which I would say we don't. Definitely not multifamily for all the reasons that were stated. That is a good, but I think, probably the police department could weigh in on this is calls that they have, how many calls do they end up going to a Airbnb or VRBO? I know there's one in my neighborhood and, I think of several instances where there's been problems and not problems in the neighborhood, but speeding down the neighborhood road and different things like that, that when you're in a community that you don't do, when you're just there for a night, kids renting it, partying or whatever, and taking several garbage bags, empty beer cans with them when they leave, they cleaned up after themselves. But again, I don't feel like there's an obligation that, we need to provide these, but I feel like if we do have them, and if the council feels like we should allow them, then I would say that we have some kind of 3 strikes rule that's like, okay, if you have them, if the police are called this many times, or you have a certain amount of instances due to lack of management or whatever, if their house becomes known as, hey, people rent this one because you can party like crazy and blah, blah, blah. But if it becomes an issue to the community, have that. If the police are called and they go there after so many times, it's like your license is revoked, you can no longer do that, or there's fines and something with teeth that at least people, what motivation is it for an owner to upkeep, to ensure that there's proper, because I know they can have rules and they can, just not anybody can rent them. I don't know, I don't use them, so I don't know, but what the process is.
Who's the person that can't rent them?
That I just know that
It's anyone with a
Like-
credit card can rent them.
like they can be kicked out or whatever, and I don't know how you enforce it either. But I just know people renting one by us had to leave after one night because they cause problems.
And I'm not
So-
here to say that all of them will be problems. But I think what we're trying to build is a community. And
And that's where you have to look at, what does it add to the community and what does it take away?
Yeah.
What are the positives and the negatives? And for the positive side, it is, helps someone who may not be able to afford their house or be in tough times, be able to make ends meet for a little while, for the short term. That may not be bad. I don't see much positive, so I'm just trying to
Yeah.
be optimistic here,
I appreciate it.
but the same could be said, really is, I would much more lean towards leniency on long-term rentals in people's houses than short-term, just because of, sense of ownership or community that people have when they're somewhere more than 72 hours. But
I just like to remind.
that's my
everyone
opinion.
I think I was pretty passionate when I gave that little spiel there. It doesn't mean that feel free to disagree. I hope, I above all things, I appreciate multiple viewpoints, and that's what we're supposed to be as a body that has different ways of viewing.
Yeah, and I don't want it to come across that I definitely don't feel like everybody who rents VRBOs these are problem people and cause problems. Commissioner Mason, I don't know what he does when he goes out of town, but I wouldn't think he
I rent a
causes
VRBO.
problems when he's in somebody's Airbnb or VRBO, but
I run a VRBO from somebody that doesn't have a strong planning commission. From some city.
But I guess for my recommendation to council would be that is if we are, allowing them or continuing to allow them, that we develop standards and teeth and like I said, some kind of 3 strikes you're out program that, because if it is becoming a nuisance to the police force and that to watch and govern and revoke it.
So this is based on regulations, not allowing them. Or am I under the assumption that the allowing them is already,
Yeah, we currently allow them.
okay,
So it's currently allowed per business license. I sat in the training on this in the APA Utah conference, and basically, if your ordinance doesn't expressly disallow them or expressly give you very specific regulations, then you allow them by the very nature that you allow a rental. So you allow a rental, it's 1 day or forever. And so you can say, we will not allow short-term rentals, and then you define what a short-term rental is, and rentals less, fewer than 30 days. And then you can do that outright. There's no obligation from the state that these types of rentals have to be permitted. Long-term rentals, we really can't control. Somebody can long-term rent their home, long-term rent their basement. That's protected by state code, and even long-term renting of the accessory dwelling, accessory dwelling units, they're now an obligation in internal or attached in all single-family zones. But you have, full opportunity to write restrictions, control. You could say these have to be owner occupied. There are tons of ordinances out there to do that. You can say, no, we don't want these at all. And then it just comes down to an enforcement issue and if we don't allow them at all, you will inevitably have the next person who has the money and the time and is willing to spend the effort. You'll be right back here with an applicant giving you a single-sided testimony of how these are the best thing ever. And they are an add to your community, and they're going to, so it depends on who you want to listen to and when, because somebody will inevitably come back and attempt to reinstate them.
Totally agree with that. Could you have an opportunity last time you gave us a bunch of pros of this, and there may be something I'm overlooking. Like,
No, I think
I understand we're trying to bring people out of the shadows, and we can tax them on their income, where right now they're going to do it, in the dark, and we won't know. Is there other benefits I'm missing?
no, not really. I mean, I can totally see not allowing these in multifamily. That creates parking issues. The biggest thing that we have are party houses and parking issues that I've dealt with in short-term rentals. For me, it's just, do we have the political will to shut them down? I don't know. And do we have the staff in code enforcement to deal with them from a shut you down basis? I would push back a little bit that we try to keep businesses out of our homes, because I think we've actually done the opposite, which is to permit and encourage people to monetize their houses, to include our own planning commission member, Jonathan Webb, doing a flower farm and a business there and attempting to do what we can to grow that business. And that's everything from bookkeeping to somebody who starts a construction business and trying to keep their trailer legally parked. We want people to feel like their home is an asset that they can monetize and run a business out of it. They need to. These are a little
But at
different.
the point you abandon that home and rent it up to someone, it's no longer your home. It's an asset that you're making money on, right?
It's true.
So would you, if we are allowing them? I know your stand is not at all, but I guess I look and say if the owner occupied is a huge step, that's different.
Yeah, owner occupied is a different thing.
So,
Because you're making a set, like, I can agree that, hey, I can't make ends meet, but if I bring this, people into my basement, I think you have a vested interest in that. I'm really worried about an out of state or out of town person owning a couple homes in North Ogden because it's a cash cow in the winter, and and maybe they like this. I don't know. I just really don't like the idea.
so can you make a lot of money renting a house in North Ogden?
I have no idea, but
Yeah.
eventually.
I know of a few in
Maybe I have to
Plain
keep
City
mine.
that are
When that house we bought 20 years ago, absolutely. I mean, today, at today's rate, probably less so, but the townhomes, yeah, you probably are making a decent.
A lot of people grab a stake to buy homes here, then rent them here and have somebody manage it for them.
Yeah, what's it gonna do to the home prices in our town if we let, and I'll just vilify California, California investors come in and buy up houses to rent them in the short term, right? It's supply and demand. It's fewer homes for North Ogden residents to occupy, and the price is gonna go up. And, same can be said for long term, but we don't have the teeth we don't have the ability to legislate long-term rentals, and nor really should we, because there's people who can't afford to buy homes and need homes, right?
On the owner occupied piece, I'd want, if that's the direction the planning commission wants to go, we need to be explicit about that for staff in writing up the ordinance language, because owner occupied can mean resides in it 180 plus days, in which case when they're not residing in it, they're on vacation, they're short-term renting their home. So there's owner occupied, and then the owner is actually physically on site. And again, that comes down to a police knock on the door and say, is the owner here? No, they're out grabbing pizza. Are they going to hang out for 45 minutes and wait for the person to maybe show up? Or are they going to say, okay, keep the noise down and walk away? Like, I don't know, but it's the harder we write the rules, the more we have to think about how we're going to administer them. And we run a pretty tight ship of a staff in a city the size that we have.
Yeah.
So we can write all the rules we want, but it's going to be that much more difficult.
Who's gonna enforce it?
So I'm all for writing technical ordinances, whatever you want to do.
I think that anything above it, just my gut feel here, anything above a 2-week rental, and you're gonna avoid a lot of, okay, so why do we want to limit certain businesses in the neighborhoods? Well, it's if that business is offensive from noise or smells or whatever, right? Traffic, parking, all that kind of stuff. And so that's the only reason really I want to limit these, well, there's a whole bunch, not the only reason, that's one of the reasons. If someone's gonna rent for 2 weeks plus, chances are they're not gonna party every night for 2 weeks. I've tried that and it's very difficult to do. I haven't really. But so this is what I support is anything under 14 days, any rental under 14 days is prohibited. Or maybe 15 days, whatever that number is. Anything without owner occupied, and I guess I don't really have a say in that. If the owner lives there 180 days a year, that they're still doing what we talked about, which is developing a relationship with their neighbors and stuff. And you have someone you can go to and say, when you rent this out, when you leave for Hawaii in the winter, it sucks for us. You know, at least they can have that conversation. So I'd be pretty loose on the definition of owner occupied. But that's where I'm leaning on that.
Who administered, we'll figure it out on the other side.
I appreciate your expertise in this. You know that, right?
I
Because he's just
wonder-
trying like.
I'm thinking, how, who do you ask if the renter is there? The renter, you get a doorknob, or, you know, a short-term renter showed up and the neighbor just really dislikes it. Every time that new person's gonna come, they're gonna call the cops and they're gonna say, I need you to assure that this person's gonna be here for 14 days. Whether or not there's even been an implication of a noise complaint, of anything else, if that neighbor knows the requirement is 14 days, they're gonna call the cops. And then the cops have to go up and drive up, knock on the door, talk to the renter. Like what,
Well, when they apply for the
you're
business
you're
license,
saying that somebody who's there for 14 days is probably a better renter. To me, it's a value judgment, like,
I mean, technically, long-term rent is 30 days.
yeah, 30 plus.
So I don't,
So just
Okay.
market.
we
as
probably
long-term
don't need to
rentals are
make it,
not-
yeah,
are not-
Overly
it's not
complicated.
yeah, complicate it by trying to say.
It's separate, it's either short or it's long, yeah.
fair enough. I saw that as, hey, when they apply for this business license of ordinances, and to some extent, you know, we're not playing like nanny nurse here on nurse nanny or what is that phrase?
Well, the hard.
On every little thing.
And right now, I mean, if they are operating it illegally, which we know there are, and the state doesn't allow us to use the free speech of them listing it on a VRBO or Airbnb site as the sole reason that we go after them. We have to have like a secondary complaint or some other way to like backdoor to get.
Really?
So the state stripped that out of our toolbox, because there were cities who were their business license official or their code enforcement would say they're on VRBO and then cite people because it was a revenue stream.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't you? So the business community fought back and said, no, it's free speech. I can say whatever I want about my house to include that it's listed on here. But you have to prove that I'm actually doing it. Anyway, so we can't do that.
That seems weird.
And so so if we make the rules harder, then bringing the people who are already doing it illegally into compliance is harder. But I guess that doesn't really change the other side of, once we find out about one, like the one in Village Collins Point, those people will apply for the business license and they will say yes to any of those regulations in order to maintain that business license.
Except if we don't allow multifamily, then
And then in that case, they'd be shut down.
Due to the close nature of multifamily, just generally living physically closer to one another, I'm completely opposed to it in
I am too.
multifamily. I think
Absolutely.
that's.
I think that's united feeling with all this.
Yeah.
All right. Recommendation of the city council.
I mean, I'd love to say let's ban them all together, but I don't know, that could create a bigger problem, or we're just gonna see it again in 2 months, but
We
it
are,
might still be the right answer.
right, if it is the right thing to do, does opposition to it change that, right? Does if it's the right thing to do, and I think it is.
For our community.
I just don't know, I don't know how to make a motion that includes, this is the points I want. Could you help me? So let me try. I'd move that we recommend to the city council that short-term rentals in shorter than 30 days be prohibited in North Ogden City, unless they're owner occupied. And if they are owner occupied, the rules are as stated in the staff report given to us tonight.
With the exception of even no multifamily, whether it's owner occupied or not.
Correct. And yeah, the short-term rentals not be permitted regardless of owner occupation in multifamily zones.
Yeah, and another way to state that would probably be just the addition to the staff report that properties that are short-term rented must be owner occupied.
I can support that word. So to restate, I move that we adopt the staff report as written with the addition that in the single family zones, the short-term rental must be owner occupied.
Okay.
And I believe you already had the multifamily taken out of your staff report, right? Correct. Okay.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Vancaro,
Yes,
Commissioner Mason,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Watson.
Yes.
I vote yes. Right, that recommendation will move on to the city council. If you,
Can I ask a question?
yes,
Did you specify how long the
It was in the
owner
ordinance.
has to occupy it? Like all year? Can they be gone half the year?
I
No,
didn't,
owner occupied, I think right now is a state defined term unless we choose a different term, which is 181 days or something like that a year. So they have to be in the house at least that long. That doesn't say they have to be there for 180 consecutive days. I mean, and they might be the short-term renter, like they might be there 2 weeks and then gone 2 weeks and here 2 weeks and gone, but they own and occupy the property. So I'll double check what state code has, or the other way I do this is I check a whole bunch of other ordinances and we grab and pick and choose, but it's 180 days.
We do have a lot of detail regarding owner of occupancy in our ordinance regarding accessory dwelling units. So
Yeah, might lean on other.
Similar.
Yeah.
okay. And I, by no means do I think this is going to be abused, right? There's going to be people who don't even know to ask and listed on VRBO, and there's people who know to ask, but choose to do differently. There's going to be a whole spectrum of abuse of this, but I feel like it's a reasonable ordinance for people.
I think it's interesting. I know you were working on the enforcement and the fines and things like that, but this Hurricane City short-term rental rules and regs posting slide that you had on here. I noticed the last one said any violation of city ordinances with regard to short-term rental carries a $750 a day fine. Call this number to report a non-compliant rental. So.
Well, you know, you've done
Could be
30,
interesting.
you've done the 30 days, you pretty well much got rid of Airbnbs, they're gone. Cause Airbnbs usually on a couple of days for ski trips or something else. So when you do the 30 days, you pretty well told people, well, that's too long for what we want.
And we're not, you didn't recommend they have to be there 30 days,
No.
right?
Yeah, I did.
Is that in your
No.
motion?
No.
That was our definition between long-term and short-term, over 30 days.
You're saying, so you were saying, let me just clarify, so I understand. Right now, the way in my head, I'm thinking this thing. Short-term rentals, any rental less than 30 days is permitted if the house is owner occupied.
That is,
And in a
that is the way I interpret
and in
my
that-
motion.
non-multifamily zone.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
But but that doesn't mean that the owner is on site. It still is just, it'll operate
Right.
as a standard Airbnb or VRBO. You know, they might rent for the weekend, they might rent for 5 days, for 7 days, for up to 30 days.
If it's owner occupied.
But if it's owner occupied, that doesn't mean owner occupied, and the owner is on site
Sleeping there.
sleeping there during the.
Yeah.
I said about
I know,
owner
I know,
occupied.
I know, I know, I'm just worried.
You know,
I could go to Hawaii for a month and rent my house out when I'm down on the nightly rental basis.
What we're protecting there is that it's still your home
Mhm.
and you're tied to it. And it's not an investment that you made.
Right.
Or that you and 12 neighbors.
Your community.
But
your
he doesn't have to
neighbors.
sleep in the bedroom while
Right.
the rest of the house is occupied by tourists.
That's a bed and
Yeah, I really,
breakfast.
I really do, oppose. Me, my brother, my dad, my uncle, we all get together and we pitch, we buy a house and rent it out. Get this little bit of income coming in. I oppose that. And so I think that solves that. Still gives a way for talking to be featured on the VRBO website.
Okay. I like.
All right.
Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Okay, item number 6, zone text amendment 2022-6. Discussions, consideration and recommendation on a legislative amendment regarding accessory building standards in the R2, R3, R4 and PRUD zones. Presenter is Kai Johnson, our planning technician. Kai?
Good evening, Chair and Commissioner. If you remember, we discussed this, I think it's a little over a month ago. We didn't have an ordinance prepared at that time. We put the ordinance together and took it to council, and there was an item of input they wanted some further input from you on. So, John, let me bring up the ordinance. So if you'll remember we found that the standards in these zones aren't consistent with the R18 and R110 zones. So we have updated that ordinance to be more consistent. But in doing that, there was a table that was found that was also not consistent with the ordinances. And contained in that table, there was a maximum size of 599 square feet on accessory buildings in these zones. And so the council wanted input specifically on that, if that is appropriate to have, or if the 25% maximum coverage of the rear yard is sufficient to limit the size of those buildings in those zones.
And the reason they've asked that is, and for all the other accessory unit buildings, there's no limit, it's all limited by lot size. So if you have a 3-acre lot, you could build a 0.75 acre accessory building.
30,000 square feet.
Yeah, I would say, make it consistent with the others. I don't know why we'd have a size
I agree.
in there. I mean, obviously the lot size in the R4 zones or whatever are pretty small, but PRUDs, yes, they're small, but also Lakeview Heights is a PRUD. So there are also plenty sufficient lot sizes in those as well. So that would be my thought, but
It's a point, I thought we took care of that.
I agree with Eric.
any other specific changes you were highlight?
Accessory buildings were not listed as a permitted uses in some of these zones, so they did add those as a permitted use, and I did add a reference to the standards for the accessory buildings, that's the design standards for the exterior zones, and I added a reference to the table for the site development standard for the RUVs.
Okay, any other questions for Kai?
Just think if you were here on time, you could have been home an hour and a half ago.
I don't think it works that way.
All right, do we have any, let's invite the public. Do we have any comments from the public? All right, discussion, recommendation. So, I mean, I think as it sits now, we're in agreement recommending the changes Kai made with the exception of removing the 599 square feet and just make that consistent with the other.
Are we actually doing a recommendation of anything?
I think this gets recommended to the city council.
Okay.
Yeah,
I did the last two.
This says conduct a public hearing to be open. Do we need to?
Do we do that?
Oh, yeah,
on the-
we didn't at least involve the public's input. at
It
all.
didn't say that, but the recommendation says conduct a
Or
public
did
hearing.
we need to have a public hearing?
So we've technically already had the public hearing.
Okay.
When we did it, like,
Okay.
4 weeks
Okay.
ago, or,
Okay.
so we're,
I mean, we asked for public comment, but official public hearing on that.
yeah,
Did
we
we have the
noticed
public
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll go ahead and make a recommendation that we remove the the size limit as discussed and adopt the other changes that have been made in the site, in the staff report here for this item.
We need to make a recommendation to the
Oh, yeah.
city council, right?
Yes, that we, yeah, so I'll move that we pass on a positive recommendation to the changes in this made by Kai in the staff report and the removal of the size limit for the accessory dwelling units.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Commissioner Nancarrow,
Yes.
Commissioner Mason,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Watson.
Yes.
I vote yes. All right, thank you. We'll open up for public comments now. If anybody would like to address us on something or eager to tell the planning commission, please step up to the mic and do so at this time.
I guess the one, Chris Paul again, thank you for the comments, but I think the biggest thing is aesthetically pleasing. I think, that's one of the things that, overall, the planning commission needs to look at. And in that regard, something completely different is, parks in the north part of the city. I don't know if that's a plan or something. I haven't heard anything or seen anything recently on it. I just know that Mountain Road's gonna shotgun across and just hadn't seen anything or heard anything about parks, and that's something in the works.
Yeah, so I can address that. There's still a significant amount of land above Long Bench and above Mountain Road to
Right.
develop. And so every developer that has come to us with a plan for that area, we're attempting to work out a significant amount of park space up there. So we have this like Lakeview Park is probably the closest kind of unimproved or natural park to where you're at. And then above Mountain Road, we will hopefully end up with 30 to 40 acres of park space along with that development that happens up there. And interconnected trail systems and other things. So it's long-term plan for the general plan is to push it up a little further up the hill.
Okay. And for the workers, yeah.
I tried. That's me. Thanks. Well, before you sit down, sir, I know you didn't exactly what you wanted here tonight, but I hope you feel heard, because I did hear and ingest your comments, but your first point tonight on your closing remarks was about aesthetically pleasing. Could you qualify what you meant there? Because that's something that's tough to legislate.
Yeah, and I think that, because we were talking about rock walls, cement walls, retaining walls, how they're built, et cetera, understand that, how things fail, engineering, I get all that. The aesthetic pleasing part that frustrates me the most is that rock walls look so cool. And somebody said it, that if they're maintained. But if they're on a slant that you sit up on your pedestal over there, you never see it, you're not going to do anything about it. And if it's an 8-foot thing going, at an angle, I'm going to see it. And if I see a straight wall that's one color, be it tan or whatever, I think it's aesthetically pleasing. Heck, I might put some clouds on it. It's one of those things that if, you see weeds and crap versus a solid wall, that's one of the, I didn't say that before, but that to me is one of the biggest things is that, and that, who does that look bad on? The person that doesn't maintain it or me? Because to me, it looks, I have to look at it every day. He doesn't, or she. So that's the, and to me, aesthetically pleasing is, yes, it's in the eye of the beholder, but to me, the biggest part of that is when you say if statement always ends in failure. I think the biggest thing, as long as you do that, if. That's, to me, that's a qualification for aesthetically pleasing. If you say an if in there, you're done. So anyway.
Good comments. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Scott, do you have anything for us?
Just that the moderate income housing plan was approved by the council and uploaded to the state today. So we have met that requirement at least before October 1. So hopefully we'll hear back from them and we met our requirements.
Okay.
That's all I have.
John?
Nothing too big and exciting, other than there is the Utah Land Use Institute opportunity for training at the end of October. Typically, just as everyone knows, my dad runs that group. He doesn't make money if more people show up. It's not like he makes extra money. He gets paid an hourly wage from the board, but it is a good training opportunity if you have the opportunity. We're looking at our budget for training, but I might even be able to convince someone to give us some free seats if it's citizen planners, because he struggles to get those people in the room. So
You said it was in Mountain?
no, I wish.
Okay.
It's in beautiful exotic San
Basically the same thing.
It's like the valley.
Just, it's long flight.
2 days?
So
Was it 2
it's 2 days, but you can sign up for 1 day or so it's a day and a half. There's a full day and there's a half day. And we can get you information on that as it comes, as we get closer.
But you can't stay in a VRBO if you go down.
Yeah. All right, thanks. I failed to ask planning commissioners any remarks. All right. Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.